Okay, tabletop review on the Chinese variants of the Elcan Specter DR combat infantryman scope. As we know, the Chinese have been making knockoffs and copies of fairly decent infantry-grade rifle scopes for a long time. This is one of the original Colt scopes that I had bought when I was in the Marine Corps back in the late 1980s. I actually specifically bought this for the Panama operation. I ended up not going on that, but this was a scope I bought to put on my M16A2 because scopes were not commonly issued to regular troops back then. Normally they were only issued to snipers. And although this particular scope was engineered to go onto the M16A2 and was engineered to be general issue, it was actually never, they never made it to the troops, never issued. They were available at local gun shops for around $230, $250. I don't know if Colt still sells these or if they're still sold. The version for the M16A1 was 3x20. That was the only difference. It was a little more magnification on the A2 model. A big advantage of this, of course, was that it had very high quality optical glass made by Hakko of Japan and a bullet drop compensator. Now, where you'll see a lot of these scopes, and remember the 1980s price was around $250. Over the years, that price tended to stay the same. My understanding is, although there's nothing on this that would say made in USA or made in Japan or whatever, if it had the Colt marking, it was authentic. What happened, though, was it was an accepted design as a standard issue scope for the carry handle ARs and M16s. And the Chinese had gotten a hold of one, and they made knockoffs of those scopes as some of the very first Chinese-made infantry scopes for the M16 series rifles. And a lot of foreign militaries picked those up, but they were usually buying the Chinese versions. They didn't want to buy the one that went through Hakko of Japan, that went through Colt for additional pricing markup. So if you ever see a scope in this configuration these days, it's usually a Chinese-made one, usually not the US-made one. It had no night vision capability on it, because remember back then our night vision equipment was usually a PVS-4 for the rifle scope and then a PVS-5 for the goggles. And although Major Plaster had a video of somebody using PVS-5s with the rifle scope, I can tell you that never happened. You can't use. There's a reason why he does that in a line drawing instead of a picture of a guy doing it. You could not use these with the PVS-5. On to a little bit more modern era. Apparently Special Forces has gone over to an Elcan scope for issue in Special Forces or Ranger units. I'm not aware of these being used in Marine Corps units. It's possible, but I haven't been keeping quite up to date with them over the years. But what happened is, again, the Chinese got a hold of a sample and they decided to come out with their own version. Now, I've looked up the original Elcan scopes and the Specter DR series, and what's happened is they're very, very expensive. In fact, they're around $2,600–2,800 each. And if I'm spending that kind of money, I expect to find an intensifier tube inside. I can't imagine spending that kind of money on a glass optic, but they do that. And even when the Chinese came up with their own copy, this is one of the most expensive of the Chinese knockoffs. They usually sell in the United States for about $150 or more. It's so rare that you're going to see an original that a lot of people may not be able to tell. But from what I understand, the Chinese version uses a CR2032 battery, which is these. Each one comes with 2 batteries. It comes with a spare. And the US version uses some sort of a camera battery, although I haven't been able to confirm that, and I'm unlikely to buy one of the US versions to find out. One of the big differences on this compared to other scopes is that your windage and elevation adjustments are external to the scope, which means they're in the mount. And that's the way the British and Canadian have been engineering their stuff. You would adjust the scope much in a way that you would adjust an iron sight, which is that it's mechanical stuff on the outside of the optic that you do the adjustment. Their opinion on that is that when you have your windage and elevation adjustments being external to the scope, that you don't have any moving parts inside the scope, therefore there's less to go wrong. Now, on this Chinese scope, you do have a Illumination Assembly on the inside of the scope, which is a little LED type of thing that shines through a prism in order to illuminate a center dot on a reticle. It does not illuminate the entire reticle, it only illuminates the center dot. So what you'll have here is the Christmas tree reticle, which is kind of difficult to see, but we can see how that goes in the scope. I just don't know if we can hold the camera and get that whole thing, but you can kind of see part of what's going on with that. When I turn the scope on, what's going to happen is we have green illumination, and then if I turn this on in the other direction, we should have red illumination. No, it's off. Okay, let's go in the other direction a little more. And there, I see some red. It's not very bright. I think we can turn that on a little brighter. And it will be a little brighter. There you can see the red illumination. And again, that's just on the center dot. Now, there's another version of this where there's a flip lever that goes from 4 power to 1 power. Now, apparently on the original Elcan, it's a prism that flips when you switch that. And that's part of the reason why the original Elcan is very expensive. On the Chinese version, it's a little slider thing that goes in and out. So much in a way you would adjust, let's say, a 3x9 Tasco or Bushnell rifle scope. I opted for the original British and Canadian concept of reducing the number of moving parts inside the scope. So I got a pair of these in 4 power only, one for myself, one for a friend of mine. The other thing is, this is going on a training rifle. This is going on an airsoft training rifle. So I didn't want to get super high dollar, tied into that. And it's a range rifle. It's not used in force on force scenarios. I have aluminum targets I use with that. And I felt that this would be excellent for getting me familiar with some of the newer equipment and the reticles and things like that. There's also a little bit of an issue with these, and it comes with a little literature that explains what's going on with the red-green illumination. When a battery becomes weak, the green illumination may not come on, even though the red illumination will still work. Green light requires more electrical current. This can be resolved by putting in a fresh battery. Well, on one of these, I put in a fresh battery and I didn't get any green illumination. So what I'm going to say is that if we're ever selling these, we're only going to guarantee that they work in red. We're not going to guarantee that they work in green. If I have one that works in green, that I can confirm works in green, then we'll go with a slightly higher price for it. The reason I wouldn't trash the entire scope because it doesn't work in green is because the US version doesn't do that either. And again, I'm going to have to look things up, because if I were going to make a perfect weapon scope on something like this, I would use tritium illumination, not a battery system. But as soon as you're using tritium, of course, it becomes a much more expensive optic. The scope mounting on these tends to come in a couple different versions, one of which is an ARMS style throw lever, the other is a big screw nut. After doing some initial examinations on the ARMS throw lever that the Chinese are making, I would say it's much better than their older versions, but it's still not quite up to what you'll get from ARMS. I put it on a WeTech CQB M4, and people had said that they're loose on a mil-spec rail. Well, the night rail system on my Airsoft M4 is the real deal. So I put it on there and it seemed to be tight. When I put it on the airsoft rifle upper, it kind of felt like it was less tight. So I don't know. It's interesting because I'll be showing another video where I bought an accessory from the same company for the airsoft M4, which did not fit, and I'll explain why in another video. My guess is this is all going to fit real deal stuff just fine, but I think I would feel more comfortable using the one that has the octagon thumb levers or the hexagon thumb levers. The hexagon thumb levers, you wouldn't want to go and stick like a big torque wrench on there, but using a Leatherman tool, you get a little bit more range of movement. The other thing about the mount that I kind of like is that it only has a single crossbar for aligning on your stuff. Therefore, it ought to work on something that uses a weaver mount in addition to a Picatinny rail. The spacing of your crossbars between weaver mounts and Picatinny rails is usually different. And so what happens is if somebody was not making their rails specifically to match perfectly on this spacing, the scope won't be compatible. And I ran into that with some East European made night vision scopes where I had to modify the Picatinny rail on an AR upper in order to get it to work. And the guy who owned the AR didn't want the rail modified, and I told him, well, it's $80 to $100 upper receiver. It's there's two ways this goes. We modify your scope, which I think is a bad idea, or we modify the upper, or you get a different scope. We ended up modifying the upper, but it's one of the things where this has only a single cross rail to prevent forward and backward movement during recoil. That's sufficient, and it does what it's supposed to do. There you can see the little spring brace and all that keeps tension while this thing is adjusting. So I've noticed this video went a little bit long, but it's going to be a longer tabletop review so that you can answer all of your questions in one video. You get iron sights on the top, and the kit usually comes with extra iron sight parts so you can change your elevation front and rear on your iron sights. You can also, if you want to do the canted aiming with this, you could simply unbolt it there and bolt it into one of the side positions, or you could install the additional iron sights on there, and by canting your rifle into the different positions, you would have different range settings on your backup iron sights. It also has a mount on the top for the Chinese version of the Doctor optic. I don't know if it can fit the original, but my understanding is the original is also an import device, but that's what these threaded holes in this flat area is for. The mount, the construction, the glass, everything appears to be very, very, very robust. I don't know if this is a licensed copy or not, but they went ahead and put the markings on that would be the same as original. The other thing I noticed is that they serialize these, and quite often when the Chinese stuff is serialized, what happens is it all just bears the exact same serial number that came from the original that they copied, that they reverse engineered. On this one, I only got 2 of these shipped in, but they did come with 2 very unique and different serial numbers, so it may be quite possible that they have their own coding system which will code their serial numbers to their own production. The other thing I noticed on this is that the mold lines on these are cast aluminum housing, very heavy duty, very strong. The mold lines are in different places. That tells me that they are mass producing the scopes. They are employing more than one casting foundry to make these scopes. So they've put these into serious production. Rumor out of China is that they are being produced by a military supplier in China with the intention of being sold to foreign governments. However, I think they may still be in a test and evaluation process on that, because currently they are mainly just being sold in the airsoft market and the crossover civilian markets. To the best of my knowledge, there's no verified military users on these scopes, but it looks like the Chinese intend on eventually making these a issue scope, and they've rejected the idea of copying every single feature that makes the original Elcan so expensive. This is a mass-produced item, so we would assume that spare parts can be swapped between them. And if you have a survivalist group or a militia type group where you're looking at standardizing a pretty good but affordable optic with your people, I'm going to say that this is going to be one of your top choices. I still am a big fan of the EOTechs, but I've noticed that some of the quality control has been slipping. The other thing that happens is that older individuals who have eyes that are starting to deteriorate don't work so well with the holographic optic, and it's straight red dots. The aim points seem to work better with older guys, guys over 40. That's one of the reasons James Yeager doesn't speak too favorably or use EOTechs much on his stuff. He's over 40. He's going to prefer the aim point. This is going to use an aim point style dot. As far as the 1 power versus 4 power, I believe that's personal choice. Part of my choice was I wanted to buy 2 of these for a side-by-side comparison. I went with a 4 power only. And again, first world military considered 4 power to be unaffordable. The Marine Corps had evaluated and rejected these entirely on the issue of cost. They didn't want to issue these to troops. They didn't want to risk breakage. A very robust, very good scope. And as you can see, in recent conflicts, the U.S. Marine Corps' philosophy on that changed. In fact, I was threatened by a captain who's probably now a general with Article 15 for installing the semi-rifle. They didn't believe in combat effectiveness as much as they believed in just, obedience and rules. And like the Chinese have said, that if they were to have a war with the Marine Corps, it would be like an army versus a marching band. And we would like to think that the modern Marine Corps is much more capable and that sort of a thing. But with the Chinese producing stuff like this, they're no punks. They're definitely no punks. They know what they're doing. They've built a good solid scope. You'll find these through various sources for... you can go under $100 each if you're going to buy them direct from China, and around $150 to $180 retail in the United States. Although I could suspect that they can be as high as $200 at gun shows, and especially if you consider that sometimes the green illumination will not work on one, and if you could guarantee that the green and the red work, and everything's fully functional, and you get all of the stuff that's supposed to come with it, you're going to do fine. The packaging is just plain Jane white box packaging. So you're not going to have any indication of whether you get one with a functioning green illumination or other little features unless you can see it, touch it, feel it before you buy it.